Welcome to the Crosscheck, the squawk sheet that uncovers the stories, challenges, and careers shaping business aviation today. I'm your host, Rob Hoffman.
And I'm Ian Lum.
Today, we're joined by someone whose path defies convention. Ryan DeMoor started in the cockpit and ended up leading one of the most forward thinking aviation tax teams in the business. He's now head of aviation tax at MySky and chair of the MBAA tax committee. We'll talk about how he made that leap, his hand in the creation of tools that are reshaping the way operations manage costs and compliance, and why sometimes it pays to be the outsider in the room. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it. Good to see you too, Ian.
Yeah,
Uh,
welcome. Good to see you.
Ryan, before we begin, tax compliance and being a pilot, it seems almost incongruous, but I want to hear the cool stuff first. Talk to us about your history and your start in aviation.
Yeah, Rob. So obviously, those are two things that don't necessarily always go together, correct? And like you said, and so I, like any other 3-year-old, looked at the sky and saw an airplane and decided I was going to be a pilot at that point in time. I actually grew up with 3 older sisters. And so my dad and I escaped the house to go watch airplanes because he was always interested in aviation as well. And so went to get my private license when I was in high school. Ended up graduating high school with a private pilot's license and decided to go to Embry-Riddle and ended up going to Embry-Riddle for 4 years down in Daytona and had a great time and was super lucky as far as timing was concerned and pretty much got hired right out of college into the right seat of a CRJ for a regional airline. And so had a great first couple months of flying as a commercial airline pilot and figured I'd sort of achieved my life's dream and goal. And I was going to be flying for the next 40 years and then call it a career. And it's funny how things change over time because 9 months into my career, 9/11 happened. And that was a very eye-opening experience. And woke up the next morning to the ongoings, and that sort of forever changed how I viewed my career and how the world viewed my career. And it sort of set me on a slightly different path. So my father had always kind of said to me, "Hey, you should always have a backup. Do something else just in case, right? You never know, your health can go bad, something can happen, right? You should always investigate something else." So I'd always kind of been interested in the finance and tax side of things. So I figured, I should eventually think about going to get an MBA. So when I worked for Atlantic Coast Airlines, which became Independence Air, so when they announced they were leaving United and Delta, I went, yeah, that's probably not the best idea in the world. I should probably figure out what to do in case I lose my job. So I went back to school, got my MBA. At that time, airlines started furloughing. Eventually, Independence Air went out of business, and I was lucky enough to get hired at a charter company as a captain on a Lear 45 and a Citation Bravo, but also was able to help on the finance side. And that's sort of how I got exposed to business aviation. So for 5 years, got to fly and do finance stuff for Northern Jet Management here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is where I'm from, and really thoroughly enjoyed that. But again, funny how things change at that point. At that point in time, I ended up getting married and having kids. And by the time my second was born, I was kind of sick of being gone all the time. Had done 5 years of this finance work and really seemed to kind of enjoy it. Wanting to tuck my kids into bed every night, it became sort of a thing that, hey, maybe I should actually explore doing this full time instead of flying full time. At that point, I had the opportunity to go work for a large company. Their corporate flight department was hiring a financial analyst for the flight department. And I was lucky enough to get the job at Amway. And that was sort of the end of my flying career. So spent a number of years working for Amway as their financial analyst, and then have gone on through progressive roles as time has gone on to where I am now.
Did you have any moments of doubt, when you were making the transition? Did you miss flying? Or were you like, I mean, obviously family comes first. I get that. And I'm sure every pilot out there can relate to that. But did you miss the flying bug once you officially, hung up your cleats, so to speak?
Funnily enough, I had a wise old man once tell me that flying is the greatest hobby in the world and the worst career. And I sort of second that viewpoint on things. Because, funnily enough, the answer to the question is no, I did not actually miss it the first few years. And so it is, I don't know how to explain it. I will say this, there are times where absolutely do I miss sitting in a cockpit and pushing the throttles forward and getting sort of that adrenaline rush of in the thrill of taking off. Sure. Do I miss the overnights? Do I miss having to be gone? Do I miss all of the stuff that came along with it? Absolutely not. Right.
Yeah.
And so having a, quote unquote normal life, also had its benefits. I mean, it has its disadvantages too, obviously, but, from where I am in life and where I've sort of progressed, it's always, I've never actually had any regrets and gone back and said, oh, I really should go back to flying.
So obviously, you came into tax and compliance with the aviation background. Did that help? I mean, was there any kind of synergy there? Any of the tools that you had, or any of the skills you had acquired that really helped you on the other side of the business?
Yeah, well, and funnily enough, right? Yes, but mainly because it became very apparent that the flight departments of the world and the corporate departments, the finance and tax departments in corporations spoke two completely different languages. And it literally is two different languages, right? Is they are not in any way the same. And it became very apparent to me that, just as if you were to sit in a meeting with someone who did not speak English, it would be very hard to communicate. And that was happening often. And I realized early on that I actually could understand both and was able to sort of say, hey, I know what these guys, over in the finance and tax department, what they're looking for, what their needs are, sort of what the scope of what they're dealing with. But I also have the ability to know what's going on at the flight department because of my history as a pilot. And so that became extraordinarily helpful in being able to sort of be the translator in the room between the two sides.
No, that's got to be real helpful to be bilingual in a way, right? Speaking pilot speak and also speaking the financial side, which I imagine helped you transition and move into what you do now with MySky, right? So you're kind of blurring the lines a little bit currently. Tell us a little bit about what MySky does and how that leans into your strength there, being able to work both sides of the world.
Sure. And so I will say the company started out about 8 years ago as an auditing firm, auditing managed aircraft in Europe. So, company headquartered originally in Switzerland, and it was two individuals, someone from a aviation background and then someone from a family office background. Sort of saw what was, happening with some of the managed aircraft in Europe, and said, "Hey, we need to be able to audit these companies for the owners." And so that was sort of the genesis of the company. Grew very rapidly and ended up essentially saying, "Okay, well, if we're going to do this, we actually need to build some software to be able to scale, because just throwing people at it wasn't going to solve the growth potential of the companies." They built what eventually became our first product, which is called Spend Management. And Spend Management essentially ingested all of the invoices, used a bit of OCR technology to read and do all the line level accounting and pre-accounting work. And it was meant solely to be an internal tool to help in these audits. Well, it became very clear that being a software company is much better than being an audit company. And so they pivoted over to software. And after about 5 years, they kind of realized, hey, we have all this data here that is validated cost data, which is very important because nobody else really in the industry had that kind of size or scope of validated cost data somewhere. So they said, well, what else can we do with it? Right. And so we said, well, let's look at all the other finance areas that we can touch. And so Quote became our second product, Budget, yet another product. And at that point, they were looking for someone to help on the tax side. And so I had actually at that time I was working at Satcom Direct, but SD was sort of didn't know what to do with me and my department. And so they kind of said, hey, why don't we, sell you over to these guys at MySky? They kind of are looking for sort of the software side. And so I ended up hopping the fence about 3 years ago over to MySky with the charge of, hey, we need some tax software to help out with some of the compliance issues that a lot of corporate flight departments and private aviation companies are having. So now MySky does a few other things with the end goal of essentially being, when you think of anything finance related within aviation, we basically are building an ERP system for private aviation. And whether it be 91, 135, anywhere in between, essentially the goal is financial, quoting, budgeting, procurement, paying, tax, all of it sort of in one place, but all specifically tailored for corporate aviation.
And Ryan, what was your role in the build out of that product?
So when I started at MySky, we did not have a tax platform. So essentially, I saw a gap in the market. We at SD and previously at Aircraft Logs, there was a sort of a managed tax service where essentially we were utilizing software to help those customers. We were sort of inserting ourselves in between the finance department and the corporate flight department and saying, hey, well, as a service and acting as a go-between to do all of the reporting for the flight department, which was great. And it really, but it made me really see the need for there to be specifically tailored software out there for it. And there just wasn't anything in the market. So essentially, we built it from the ground up to sort of deal with the Part 91 compliance needs, and are getting into other areas as well with on the 135 side and so on. But the Part 91 side was kind of the starting point because of its complexity, general immateriality, because the numbers aren't that big for the rest of the company, but obviously, from an optics standpoint, it's a huge deal because you don't want to end up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal for
No,
that
it's got to
stuff.
be so sensitive with Part 91 in particular, right?
Yep, correct. And so that was kind of the, hey, I see a gap in the market where there's nothing exists, right? And the idea was we very much want to start with a system that can integrate into your current scheduling systems. I think most scheduling systems have, a bit of tax stuff in them where they're like, yeah, we'll do some, a couple minor little calculations. Who knows if they're right or not? And that's not, to badmouth them. It's just simply, it was not their main focus, right? And it was customers that had come along over time and said, hey, build us this kind of report. So there were, who knows how accurate it was, right? So we set out to say, look, we want APIs or data sheet integrations with everyone, and let's bring the data in a way that it can come across automatically. And then let's try to minimize the sort of user involvement, but get to the reporting and make it as accurate as humanly possible. So that there's confidence of the tax team that, hey, these reports are actually more accurate than what we've been getting in the past, and then let's deal with process on top of it. So yeah, I mean, it was kind of a ground up build to make sure that, can we ingest the data? Can we normalize this data in a way from any of the like 18 different scheduling systems? And yes, there are that many, that we are able to then pull that data in, but make it all be the same and then report on it from a tax standpoint.
Just out of curiosity, does size matter when it comes to this? As far as fleet size is what I'm referencing. You must have managed a pretty big fleet at Amway, I'm assuming, right? How many aircraft did you
Yeah.
have under management there under your control?
Small little 15 airplane flight department. So,
And just 15. Uh,
yeah.
and the clients you're typically servicing right now, what's the average fleet size?
The average fleet size probably around 3 to 4, and it goes anywhere from, Fortune 10 companies all the way down to, the mom and pops that own one small airplane that just fly between different offices, right? That's the thing about it, is it's kind of universal that everybody needs to comply with the rules. And so now it's mostly geared, obviously, towards the Fortune 500s and the corporate flight departments, because those are the ones that, typically utilize the services. So I'd say on average, 3 to 4 is about, an average size flight department for the software.
Could you review with us just some of the challenges in managing
Sure.
taxes that the operators that you work with face?
Yeah, and this is great, right? And so I think the biggest issue is it's such a disparate piece that essentially there's different departments doing different things with it, right? And so at public companies, you have the legal department who's sort of in charge of the SEC piece of it. The tax department is dealing with the disallowance or the deductions, if you will. And then the payroll department is dealing with what we call SIFL or imputed income. And oftentimes those departments aren't talking to each other, right? It's each department is sort of talking directly to the flight department and getting just the data that they just need, and that's it, right? And so it was payroll calls flight department, says, hey, give me your, give me the flight data so we can do some imputed income calculations. And then the legal department is getting the legs to do some of the SEC calculations. Nobody's really talking to each other. And so that has always been sort of a big issue in figuring out, hey, how do we make this a comprehensive thing that everyone gets involved here, right? And so that's kind of a big piece of it is saying, look, there's a number of, you don't want to have one side of the house saying, oh, that was a personal flight, and the other side of the house saying, no, no, that was a business flight, and they're not communicating with each other because that can become very problematic.
Yeah.
So sort of a secondary goal there, which we learned through doing the managed side, was, look, these departments typically don't speak to each other. We need to bring everyone into the room together. So the idea with the software as well was, hey, how do we get everyone into the room together to make decisions on these classifications, to say all of the reporting comes out of the system based on these classifications of the flights and the passengers. So that sort of forces everyone to have to say, well, okay, well, whose responsibility is it to set these classifications, and then how the system actually spits out the answers becomes very important, that all of those parties are sort of talking to each other.
What's one of the biggest misconceptions about aviation tax? I mean, we've talked about the lack of communication or miscommunication out there, but what else? What's the big elephant here for you?
Well, I think that the big elephant, typically the idea that the flight department make sort of those decisions, right? Well, this is one of my biggest pet peeves, all right? And it is essentially so the flight department has knowledge of the flights, and they have some knowledge of some of the tax rules and so on. So oftentimes there's sort of a desire by management at the company to say, well, you guys just deal with it, right? And you guys just sort of work on classifying those flights because you know the rules. Well, the problem with that is now you're putting those individuals that work at the flight department, right? And I've gone into departments where I've seen schedulers be tasked with making the decision as to whether that flight the CEO went on was business or personal. Well, that's not the way to do it, right? That's not their decision, nor should it be, right? Now, they can obviously set up structures that sort of say, hey, this is personal and we kind of know it is, and then it gets reviewed after the fact and managed by exception structures, but ultimately every company sort of needs that ultimate decision maker who is close to the executives, but not actually personally flying on the airplane, to sort of say, hey, what is this flight, right? If the executive's like, well, it's business, maybe it's not, right? Maybe that decision needs to be sort of looked at by someone who's a little bit closer, but who also has the authority to make those decisions
So
without
so what you're saying is
angering them.
not every pilot also has a finance background to
Correct.
understand that.
Correct. And that's it, right? The pilots, the schedulers, even the head of the department, right? And I've seen that myself recently, is not just pilots are being promoted to director of aviation. There's a lot of other, areas that directors are coming out of, but even putting that responsibility on their shoulders, I don't know if that's wise, right? Their charge is to operate a flight department safely. That is kind of what they should be focusing on, right? I don't necessarily personally believe that they should be focusing on whether a flight was business or personal, and whether the taxation of that flight then is properly complied with. They need to be responsible for it, but
Does
you
your
know, we
platform, does the MySky platform help with these
yes.
decisions or to facilitate the right call when classifying a flight? Obviously, there's a strategy component that, best practices that the department's supposed to have. You have no control over that, but maybe your platform can help. Does it?
Yes. It does. And that's kind of the thing. A lot of the reporting was built because of our experience on the managed tax side, where we were able to sort of pull together and say, okay, when we go into these departments and we help out and sort of act as that go between, what are the things that are missing? Right? Is there a unifying report that we can send out to all four of these teams or all five of these teams and say, okay, everyone, look at this and start. We'll meet again next week, and you guys have to come with sort of the homework answers, if you will, of what what you guys see this trip as being, and then being able to say, is there a location where I can store all of that backup? And that's another big piece of it, right? Is to then say, okay, well, I mean, we've had situations where companies will change their IT retention policies and nobody really even thinks anything of it until they get audited. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, we need that email from 3 years ago. Well, it doesn't exist anymore. Right. So it's kind of having that location to be able to upload that data as well. And yes, the system's fully capable of doing that at sort of the leg level and the trip level so that hey, we have the reports and the tools by which to help. On top of that, you have a team of experts. And I will clarify that I'm neither a lawyer nor an accountant, so I cannot give you an official opinion, but I can certainly give you, hey, here's how we've seen everyone else kind of deal with the situation
Nice.
and be able to say, I would lean more conservatively or, yeah, sure, that one's fine kind of thing. So,
And
Oh,
so,
good.
Ryan, the irony here is that while you're not an accountant, you still are the chair of the MBAA tax committee. So, talk to us about how that transition took place.
yeah. So, many, many years ago, I was fortunate enough to be able to go attend a tax conference that MBAA put on. And I had just an amazing time and started talking to a lot of the lawyers and accountants in the room. And after going to a couple of those events, it became quite apparent that we have a guy who's in operations because at the time I worked at Amway, right? So it was like, hey, we have someone who works in a flight department in this area who is neither a lawyer nor a CPA, but does have that operational background that might be able to put a little bit different of a viewpoint on things. And so I was invited to apply and applied for the tax committee and was lucky enough to join the tax committee and have now spent just about 12 years on the tax committee and just had an amazing time, right? At first I will gladly say that I did have a bit of imposter syndrome when I first walked in the room the first time after being put on the committee. It was a rather interesting time walking into a room with a whole bunch of people that I'd seen up on the stage talking about this stuff and who were knowledgeable and who've been spending their entire careers doing this. And then there was me, who was like the pilot in the room, who, essentially had been doing it for a couple years, but was kind of like, hey, I at least have an operations background, so I can speak to that side of it. But it was still rather intimidating to sort of walk into that first meeting after getting on the committee. But hey, it ended up working out. And as time went on, I was given the opportunity to be on the leadership team and spent 2 years as the secretary, 2 years as the vice chair, and now I'm finishing up 2 years as the chair of the committee. I have had just an amazing time, and it was an amazing opportunity, and that the people on the committee are just absolutely outstanding. And
Yeah.
they make what I do look easy as far as, I don't have to work too hard to get them to fall in line with some of the stuff that we're trying to do. So,
That's awesome. I know that's part of how we know each other. I was in a leadership role with the NBAA Young Professionals Council, and we were in some, joining conversations and calls and things, and have some experience with being an outsider and trying to like steer a committee to do my bidding or my doing and things that I want to, put forth as my initiatives. What's your experience from that side of it with the tax committee? How have you been able to use your pilot experience and outside view to shape what the tax committee does and has done in the last, you're talking about almost 6 years of being in the leadership team now. What does that look like for you?
So I think one of the biggest things, obviously, and this sort of similarly overlaps with what was happening in my professional life too, was sort of saying, hey, there seems to be a little bit of a gap in between the flight department and potentially those people that are dealing with this stuff on a day-to-day basis. So there were a lot of practitioners in the room, right? There were a lot of lawyers, there were a lot of accountants. And that's not to say that that's a bad thing, because obviously that, was really important. But sometimes maybe having that outside viewpoint of saying, hey, if I'm a director of aviation and I'm hiring these people because they're so smart, right? That's cool. But at the same time, if I want to learn some of these things, maybe the tools aren't necessarily there to do that. And so has been more of a push to sort of say, look, I wanna have some, positional diversity, involved in the room, because I think, obviously having all of those different viewpoints makes sense, and being able to say, well, who ultimately is signing up as, customers of NBAA, and who is that sort of target audience? If our target audience was other practitioners, then okay, fine, then the level of what we're doing is matched up to that. But if our target audience is actually flight departments, then how do we tailor what we have and make it sort of accessible to those individuals and to those people, to the pilot who's flying, who's trying to learn, to the mechanic who is in the 6 months to cam program, who's trying to understand what is these things that are on the finance and tax side, and how does that relate to sort of the department as a whole, right? That's kind of the target audience. And I think having that ability to kind of refocus and say, hey, it's not just about getting the really, really complex stuff out amongst our own practitioner type individuals, but to say, hey, this is our main customer as well. Let's produce things that they can utilize, that help them learn, and so on. And so, you probably saw, but this week actually, NBAA just released the glossary of aviation finance and tax terms. And that was sort of a big initiative that we did to say, we have a lot of guides, we have a lot of really in-depth stuff, but I wanted to create something that was a quick reference, sort of a QRH, if you will,
Yeah.
for terms to say, hey, I heard something in a meeting with the lawyers today as we were talking about this, that, or the other thing. What the heck were they talking about? Where can I go to find more information? And so that was sort of the ultimate goal of this glossary, was to say, hey, what does a disregarded entity mean? What are these concepts that we deal with in tax, that now all of a sudden I can kind of get a decent idea of what the conversation was about.
Give them an inside view and an understanding without having to go get the degree or do more work on that. That's
Correct.
awesome. That's good. Something I look forward to checking out. Hopefully not for a nefarious reason or something, but we'll definitely go to the website and view that. I did want to ask too, just because it's more my side of the world, right? But being a former young professional, I mean, I'm aging myself out a little bit here, always looking for ways to get more people involved. And I know tax is not the most exciting or the sexiest thing in the room, but how are you reaching out and getting young professionals excited about that? I know you've got someone on your staff who's an amazing young professional and also a great tax professional for MySky, right? Latuan,
Yes.
I hope you're listening to this. We're calling you out, bud. But how do you get more people like that, either with
Right.
MySky or with the committee or just in general, excited to do what you do and get in there and dig into the numbers?
Yeah, it's education around it, right? And I absolutely agree, right? It is not you don't go to a YoPro meetup and people start asking, well, what are you into? And you say, well, tax, right? And then people go, okay, thanks, bye. And right off they go. So no, actually, we kind of hit the jackpot with hiring Latuan. And I will say, I'm super proud of that kid and what he's accomplished so far in this industry. And, having those individuals who have that level of sort of commitment to it, but also understanding, but are then able to translate it into something that the younger generation can look at and go, hey, maybe this is something that I would like to do, right? And to be able to focus efforts on, okay, well, are there ways that the tax committee and the Yo Pros can work together to maybe bring in people that are interested and to have different ways and different methodologies by, sort of saying, once you roll off of a committee, can we be looked at for other committees? And there's a whole lot of sort of brainstorming of ideas, but it's just simply that engagement to begin with that becomes important, right? It is understanding that conversation just simply needs to happen. It doesn't need to be super in depth. It just needs to be there as a starting point to say, what can we do? How do we sort of have that, and again, I'll use the same word, it's positional diversity, right? How do we get that positional diversity with a number of different people in areas that maybe, tangentially touch tax and finance, to then go, hey, you know what? This might actually be not a terrible idea, right? Maybe this is actually a really good idea for me to sort of see what's going on there, but then to have someone to go to and talk to about it. And someone, like Latuan, who would then be able to answer their questions, right? So that's kind of the ultimate goal there.
Excellent. Well, thanks for answering that. I know it kind of feels like everyone always talks about the pilot shortage or the AMP shortage, but maybe there's like an aviation tax professional shortage out there too, and we need to talk about that at some point. But no, that's good info. Good to know.
Yeah,
The list goes on, Ian. I know
Yeah.
it's a bottomless pit of shortages over here in BizAv,
right.
aviation in general. Ryan, we're coming up on time, but I just want to kind of take a bird's eye view, open up the aperture a little bit right now, and just talk to us real quick about what's next for you. What's next for MySky?
So, yeah, lots of fun things on the horizon. We're continuing to build out the software, so that is kind of the main thrust at this point in time is to finish up sort of the Part 91 world, get into the 135 side, start working more on state tax stuff, and sort of integrating that, and then international taxes. So that way we kind of hit all of the bases, right? Not just the Part 91 stuff, but essentially getting into international pieces and how that fits into quoting in our quote platform, how that fits into our reporting on the tax side. State tax stuff, I can probably say that MySky did just acquire the state tax guide from JSSI. And so we will be transitioning a lot of that wonderful information. So Nell Stubbs, who has been just an amazing mentor to me personally, but the industry as a whole, is going to continue to be involved with the state tax guide and continue to update it for at least another 2 years. And she's obviously welcome to continue for longer than that if she wants. So we'll be working on helping her to sort of digitize some of that information in a way that can be reported on and be useful in our platform. And so we're really looking forward to that, of being able to say, hey, yeah, this, that acquisition actually made sense. So that's kind of what's next on the horizon. Is busy. A lot of advocacy work coming up. There's a lot of stuff going on in Washington right now. So
Haven't
whether it
haven't
be,
noticed.
last year with them coming out and saying, hey, we're coming after everyone with airplanes, to an administration change, to IRS rule changes, potentially SEC rule changes. There's just sort of a swath of things going on in Washington right now that it's kind of eating into my time a bit as well.
Yeah, I can imagine. I feel like there's never a dull moment in business aviation. And, with Trump in office right now, never a dull moment for anyone. It
Correct.
seems like there's no exception with BizAv as well.
Exactly.
Ryan, thank you so much for being a part of our show today. It was really a pleasure having you over here. If people want to reach out, find you online, LinkedIn, MySky, tell us how anyone can find you in the digital universe.
Yeah, no, certainly. So LinkedIn is probably the best place to come find me. I'm on there often on a daily basis. Shoot me a message on LinkedIn or a connection request, and certainly happy to have the conversation and chat. So,
Wonderful. Well, that's it for this episode of The Crosscheck. A huge thanks to Ryan DeMoor for sharing his insights and career journey from the cockpit to the complex world of aviation tax. And complex it is. If you've enjoyed today's show, don't forget to like and follow us on your favorite podcast platform and share this episode with a colleague or friend. Your review or feedback is greatly appreciated and helps us spread the word. We will see you all next week with a new episode of The Crosscheck.